Our next speaker, Jill Kelly, is part of that extraordinary period of the Vietnam War when a whole number of very talented Americans moved to Canada. And Jill arrived in Vancouver in 1970 during the middle of that era and got involved right away in the self-help movement. In the beginning, her first thing was taking the order from her communal house to the food co-op that had just been started at that time. She was part of the Birth Center, Macara, which was the Women's Graphic Arts Collective, and a founding director of the CCEC Credit Union, the Community Cooperative for Economic Change in the 1970s. And that was where I met her briefly. We were both on the payroll staffers of Company of Young Canadians. I was running a newspaper in Mount Pleasant, and she was looking at the feasibility of starting up a nonprofit credit union. Jill is a certified general accountant, mother of 2, grandmother of 3. She's a huge supporter of the co-op movement, serving as a director of the BC Co-op Association and as president of the Canadian Cooperative Association. Jill Kelly.
Thanks, Michael.
I just moved your slide. Sorry.
Little fanfare. In the short time that I have, I'm going to attempt to paint a picture of the vibrant youth community that was active in Vancouver in the early 70s. At that time, there were really a lot of young people here, lots of positive energy, and a strong urge to do it better and to take control of our lives to get what we wanted. We referred to it at the time as the self-help movement. There was an emphasis on sharing skills, sharing knowledge, teaching each other. And I've had to pick just a few areas. So I want to touch on food, healthcare, the arts, and money. So in food, that was a big deal. It still is today. Healthy food was not generally available in grocery stores at the time. And I remember taking the food order from my communal house down to the pre-order food co-op. And of course, you didn't email it in then, you went there. In fact, you hitchhiked there. That's how you got there. And you'd put it in one day, and then about 4 days later, they'd have amassed all the orders that came in on that one day, and they'd divide it up, and you'd go pick up your part. So you might order 2 pounds of cheese. Altogether, they might order 2 10-pound blocks of cheese, and then volunteers would cut your 2 pounds off, and so on. So clearly, that's a little labor-intensive, so the next step was to go to food stores, and the East End Food Co-op is an example of one that was set up at that time that's still with us. But what was interesting at the time was we did some vertical integration. So a co-op warehouse got set up to stock the food co-ops, and that was called Fed Up. And CRS Workers Co-op started up around then and opened a brokerage so they could source the foods themselves and have, again, more control over it. And Uprising Bread's Bakery was a project of CRS Workers Co-op. Now in healthcare, mostly the part that I was involved with was women wanting control over their reproductive health. And a lot of work needed to be done there at the time. So the Women's Health Collective, which I actually passed on the way here, it's just a block away now, did clinic training. Doctors would volunteer there. There was some research and a lot of just teaching each other. And the Birth Center did a lot of education around childbirth, but also some home births and teaching ourselves some midwifery. In the arts, there were a lot of artist-run centers starting up around then. And one in particular that's still going is Vivo, Video In. And back in the mid-70s, they had Sony Portapacks, which for the first time put the tools into people's hands. And if you saw a Portapack today, you would not think it was portable. But they were big, carried them on their shoulders. And prior to that, the only way you could document that way was through film, which was very expensive. So these organizations starting up occasionally found themselves in need of some financing. There were no progressive financial institutions at the time. Vancity, now everybody knows, is pretty progressive. They were not into any of that back then. So the organizations got together and said, well, I wonder if we could start our own credit union. There was a fair bit of cash flow among all these organizations. And so meetings were held with the various community groups to get support, to identify needs, and to pledge deposits. It took 3 years to set it up, but CCEC Credit Union is the result. The motto of the credit union was group solutions to individual problems. So working together, we can meet all our needs. And to this day, the bond of the credit union is cooperatives and nonprofit community organizations and their members. So, sort of to sum up and looking ahead, I see a really similar energy today happening. It's very exciting. There's lots of interest in local economies and the DIY movement. I think it's very important to remember to work together, and this is a great example of that, to develop networks and to connect with existing networks. I really hope that people will keep the concept of reciprocity alive within the community in an age when the message that we're bombarded with is to just think about what's best for ourselves. So I guess my last word was to be creative and think big. Thank you.